From the Ear to There Travel Studio, this is the Ear to There Disney Podcast.
The Ear to There Podcast, it's time to start the show. Be sure to hold on tight, here we go. Exploring all the different Disney destinations. Ear to There, it's time to start the fun.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the Ear to There Disney Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Gramlich. I'm also the owner and the founder of Ear to There Travel, which is a Disney specialized travel agency. It's my job, along with all of the other vacationeers on the Ear to There Travel team, to take away all that stress, all that anxiety, and all that time that it takes to plan a Disney trip, so you can focus on the really, really fun things like having a phenomenal time with your family and friends and enjoying the magic. So whether you're planning a trip to Walt Disney World, to Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Line, or an Adventures by Disney trip, or really, all right, I'm going to let you in on a little known secret here. We can book trips pretty much anywhere in the world. Even that theme park down the road from Walt Disney World. You know, the one with the magic kid with the glasses and a scar on his forehead and the dinosaurs and all that. We can book your trip there as well. So to find out more about Ear to There Travel, to meet our agents, to listen to this podcast, or to get your free, no obligation quote, just head over to www.eartotheretravel.com. Oh, and just like the cups of ice water that you get in all of the Walt Disney World restaurants, our services are always free of charge. That was a good one, right? All right. So I've been putting out these bonus episodes each week. These are episodes that were pulled from networks like Apple Podcasts or iTunes because they'll only hold 300 episodes on those services. Well, I have like more than that. So I've been re-releasing some interviews and some episodes that I did early on. Not the bad ones. Listen, there's like a lot of shows that you might not want to go back and listen to. But I know some of these are really, really good. And you might not be able to find them. So I wanted to re-release them. Now, this episode, this bonus show, was originally number 11, episode 11. And it's my interview with Disney legend and retired Imagineer, Rolly Crump. I was reminded by Rolly when I was out in Disneyland this past weekend for the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge preview. Now, listen, if you haven't listened to that episode, go back one episode, listen to live at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. You'll get all my reviews, all my thoughts, all my feelings, all the feels from Galaxy's Edge. It was amazing. But while I was out in Disneyland, I was standing outside It's a Small World, and I noticed the trees on top of the building, and it reminded me of Rolly Crump, because during this interview that I'm about to play you, he tells this story about how those trees just ended up on top of the It's a Small World building. It's a great story, along with a whole bunch of other stories that he tells on this one. Rolly is a phenomenal storyteller. I hope you enjoy the show. So grab a drink, grab a snack, and as a famous mouse once said, on with the show. I am so excited to share this week's episode of the podcast with you. If you've ever watched 101 Dalmatians or Sleeping Beauty, or if you've ever seen Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, or if you've ever ridden It's a Small World, then you are very familiar with Disney legend Rolly Crump's work. Please stick around until after the interview, where you'll have the opportunity to win a signed copy of Rolly's book, It's Kind of a Cute Story. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy listening to Rolly's stories just as much as I did. Here's the interview. Walt Disney once said, "I don't want the public to see the world they live in while they're in Disneyland. I want them to feel like they're in another world." Joining me on the podcast today is a man who was instrumental in transporting you to those other worlds in Disneyland. During his amazing Disney career that spanned more than 40 years, he worked as an animator, he worked at WED, which we now know as Walt Disney Imagineering, and he's recognized as a true Disney legend. I am so honored to be joined by Rolly Crump. Rolly, thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate it very, very much.
Oh, good. I appreciate that too.
So, right out of the gate, I know you've done a million of these, and people probably ask you the same questions over and over, and I'm sure you're tired of them. But I am going to get to some of those. But at first, I just wanted to ask you, what was it like making sewer manhole covers on the weekends to pay for your to be able to get by with your dream job of working at Disney?
Well, I want you to know that I didn't make manhole covers. I helped mix the mud and the bricks and lower them down in the hole, because the bricklayer that was making them was down in there. So when I talk about building manholes, I'm not building the manhole. I'm not building the lids.
So
okay.
That had to be a little tough for someone who was an artist to be doing that kind of work.
Yeah. Well, you did what you had to do, you know.
Sure. So you were hired as an animator by Disney. What was it, in 1952, I believe?
Yes.
And they were paying. I'm sorry. Can you tell this story? I read something that you were getting paid double on the weekends that you were making in actually working for Disney.
No. When they offered me the job, when I applied for it, they told me they'd start me at $30 a week. And at that particular time, I was working at a pottery, and I was making $72 a week. So basically, I thought, I don't know whether I can really afford to get a job at Disney as much. It was the love of my life to want to work there. So I went home, and I talked to my mom about it. She says, honey, take the job. She says, it'll all work out for you. So the next day I went back and I accepted the job. But then that's when I realized that I had to do some work on the side. And luckily I had a friend of mine that built manholes. And so I got a job with him on the weekends. And I made more money on the weekends, on Saturday and Sunday, building sewer manholes. And I did all week working in animation. So that's how it all got started.
Yeah. So, and then, can you talk about the first couple of things that you worked on, for Disney when you first got hired?
The first project you worked on
Peter Pan was Peter Pan.
And then you actually.
The first I never even understood what animation was, wow. And I was taught how to do in-betweens, so I was an in-betweener on Peter Pan.
Wow. And then you actually had the opportunity to work on just a few other of the Disney movies, right? You got, I believe.
Well, yeah, the other ones I worked on were Lady and the Tramp, and right after that it was, actually I got into doing Sleeping Beauty. That was the biggest one. And then, of course, 101 Dalmatians.
Wow.
In fact, one of the fun stories about 101 Dalmatians was that the animator I worked for, Eric Larson, did a sequence where the puppies were watching the television. And he came to me after he'd animated the scene and said, okay, Rolly, I want you to do the spots on the puppies. And so I said, oh, okay, which meant I had to animate the spots,
right.
Which was really something pretty special. So my claim to fame in animation was I animated the spots on the puppies in 101 Dalmatians
wow.
while they're watching television.
Wow. Yeah, that's my kids actually just saw that movie for the first time recently. So that's amazing. So thank you for that, because they really enjoyed it.
Oh, that's good. Then you can pass that little information on to them.
I will. My 5-year-old absolutely loved it. So thank you for that.
Oh, great.
So in the book, you talk a lot about how much fun it was to work in animation, and how the fellow animators would play pranks on each other. Can you tell me a little bit about the pranks that you guys used to get, played on each other?
Gags in animation.
Oh, okay. Well, we had some. There was quite a group of us. In other words, it was almost back into it a little bit. It was like being in college. The whole studio lot was like a campus,
right.
And we became very close. We talked every day. We were in sometimes I was in a car in a group of us, 5 in one room. So we became very close, almost family, about things in there. And working in animation was absolutely a delight because of all the different guys I worked with. In fact, I mentioned that to Walt one time. He asked me where I learned everything, and I said, I learned it from you. He said, what do you mean you learned it from me? And I said, because I was in so many different rooms, and I worked with so many different artists, I learned from everyone that I was in a room with, which was really true. It was an absolutely incredible time frame.
And then you and the other animators would play a lot of pranks on each other, right?
Yeah, we used to play gags on each other every day, and one of the favorite gags that we had was we would tape down the buttons on the phone. So whoever answered the phone would pick up the phone, and the phone would continue ringing. And we did that to a little guy that came working for us from South America, and he absolutely started screaming, threw the phone down, and ran out the door. And then we used to have rubber band fights because all the scenes came in these big red rubber bands, and so sometimes in the evening we were working overtime, we'd start shooting each other with these rubber bands. So it was just a crazy, crazy time.
That's really cool, and something that I didn't get a chance to read in your book. And when you were working in animation, I read that you really caught Walt's eye by designing some propellers that you had in your office that you would set up.
That's a beautiful story because it changed my life. There was an animator I was working for, and I went in to have my scene checked. Wathel Rogers was his name. And he had this little clip on a push pin on a little lamp that he had, and this little clip was spinning around like a propeller. So I asked Wathel, I said, God, that's really neat. I said, now, how'd you do that? He says, that's a secret. So I went back, and these little clips came out of the erasers on the pencils we were using. Right. And so I tried to make a propeller, and I don't know how many pencils I screwed up trying to make the propeller, but I couldn't get it to work. And so I went back to Wathel, and I said, please, Wathel, tell me how you did that. And so I drove him crazy for a while, and he finally said, I'll tell you what, Rolly, he says, I'll sell it to you. So he says he sold it to me for a penny. So when I got the little clip, I found out the reason that I was making a mistake with the clips was I was using a nail to make the dent, and which meant that it was a crooked little dent. And that what he used was a ballpoint pen, so it was a smooth little dent. So that's how I learned to make these little propellers. So I got kind of excited about them, and little by little I started building all kinds of little propellers, and I had my office filled with about 30 of them. And that's how I got started. And a good friend of mine in animation, T.E., said, you know, Rolly, said you should have an exhibit in the library with your propellers. Well, the library was used kind of as a little art gallery, and the different people that worked in animation would have a show, an art show in there. And so they said, fine, well, I went to the little gal that ran it, and she said, yeah, Rolly, we'd love to have you have a show with your propellers. So I did all my propellers, and I also did some little paintings that I did. And down the hallway, I did a whole series of posters, which were my dope posters, my marijuanas and my cocaine candy and everything. Well, the head librarian called me, and she said, Walt came in and saw your show today. And I said, oh, my God. She said, yeah. She said, he really loved the propellers. I said, did he go down the hallway where all the dope posters were? And she said, yeah. I said, what did he say? She says, he laughed. And I thought, oh, my God, he understands my little posters were kind of a gag. So that's how it all got started. Walt saw my propellers there, and it wasn't until years later when we were working on the World's Fair that he asked me to design the Tower of the Four Winds. So
that's amazing. So the Tower of the Four Winds, I wanted to get back to that in a little while, if that's okay, because there's one thing that I wanted to ask you about your start at WED. And you've been working as an animator and with the Disney company for years, right, before you ever got a call to go over and work for WED?
Yeah, I started in 52 and then left in 59. That's when I was transferred to WED from the animation department.
Right, and can you tell me a little bit about when you first met Walt Disney, when you moved over to WED?
Well, that's a beautiful little story, too. I was so thrilled to meet him. In fact, when I shook his hand, I said, Mr. Disney, it's a pleasure to be with you. And he said, well, it's nice to have you on board. Roland. He says, by the way, he says, the name is Walt, and don't you forget it, because he always went with first name basis with everyone that he dealt with, and so that was it.
Wow, that's amazing. And another story that I read was when you were working with for WED, you decided to open an art gallery in Studio City, California, and I really enjoyed your story about the night you were there alone, and a gentleman came in looking to rob the gallery.
Oh yes. Well, yeah, this is kind of fun. I had this little art gallery I was running, in the evenings, and my mom ran them during the day. And in the back of the back door to it, I went out there and I had some plants growing in my little gallery. So I was out there watering my plants, and I was on my hands and knees, and all of a sudden there was a pair of legs in front of me, and I couldn't see who it was because the light was flashing in my eyes when I got up, and I said, "Yes, sir." I says, "Can I help you?" And then I realized that the gentleman I was talking to had a bandana over his face, and he was dressed in a beautiful suit, and he had a gun. And he says, "Let's go inside." Well, about this time I thought, "Oh my God." So we went inside, and he says, "Where's you got some money?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I've got some money in my wallet." I said, "But my wallet's in my car." And he said, "Well, how much is in there?" I said, $9. And he said, "Now, do you have any money in here?" And I said, "Yes." I said, and I had an antique cash register. I said, "I have about $60 in the cash register," but I was starting to get a little worried about this because it was an antique cash register, and the only way you could open it was to lift the lid. And so I had to explain to him that I was lifting the lid to get the money because it was in there, and I didn't want him to think I was reaching in there for something. Right. So he says, "Okay." So I got the $60 out. I gave it to him, and about that time is when I kind of heaved a sigh like, "Oh," I was thinking to myself, is he going to hit me in the head? Is he going to lock me in my bathroom? Or what's he going to do with me? And he could see that I was a little concerned about something, and he thought it was about the money that I was going to lose. So he offered to give me the money back. And he says, "Here," he says, "if you need the money," and he says, "I'll give it back to you." And I said, No, you keep it. So he and I argued about the $60, and I said, No, I said, "You're going to a lot more difficulty to get this money than it was for me to get it." So he says, "Oh, okay." So he took the money and he left, and as he went out the back door, I said to him, I said, "Sir, can you do me a favor?" He says, "Yes." What is it? I said, "Please don't come back." And so he kind of chuckled and he left. And then I went across the street. I didn't have a phone in my gallery, so I had to go across the street to the bowling alley and make a phone call for the police department to come out. Wow. And they came out, and they were out in there in seconds. There was motorcycles, there was cars, there was, I don't know how many different police showed up because of armed robbery. So anyway, it was quite an experience.
Sure, I really enjoyed the little newspaper clipping in the book. That was a cool little picture to add in there.
He enjoyed the fact that you had the newspaper clipping in the book.
Yeah.
So Jeff was able to find that.
Yeah. The fellow that wrote the book found it.
Wow, that's so cool. Well, let's get to some of the really big things that you worked on while you were at WED. So you had the opportunity to work on the early start on the Haunted Mansion, right? And I know a lot what you designed wasn't put into the attraction when it was finished, but can you talk a little bit about what it was like to work on the Haunted Mansion?
Well, it's a 3-year story, but Yale Gracie and I were hired by Walt to work on the ideas for the Haunted Mansion because Walt always wanted a Haunted Mansion in Disneyland from the very day that he opened the park. That was one of the projects he wanted. So basically, Yale and I had a great big room that we worked in, and we didn't know what we were supposed to do. We were just supposed to come up with ideas that would go into the mansion. Well, luckily, Yale was kind of a tinker toy guy, and he came up with all kinds of stuff, and I didn't come up with anything other than helping him with whatever he wanted. So I built the models for Yale that he wanted to show Walt of the different projects that we were working on. One of them was called Pepper's Ghost, And it was a story of, in other words, what is it's an illusion with a big piece of glass on a stage, and it was in a book called, that we had, that Yale had, and so he wanted me to do this model of with Pepper's ghost, which reflects the ghost into a piece of glass and looks like he's in your room. So we showed that to Walt, and then the next thing we showed Walt was Yale started taking a projector and projecting it on all kinds of things in the room, on the doorknobs and on the windows and everything. And finally, he ended up, he got a loop piece of film on Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, Who's the Fairest One of All, which was Hans Conried's face. So he projected that on a little Beethoven bust, and it was absolutely incredible because the little bust looked like it was talking. Wow. And when I came back from lunch, he had it all set up and showed it to me, and I thought, oh, my God, that's incredible. Even though the eyes and the nose didn't line up, the little sculpture looked like it came to life. So we showed it to Walt, and Walt just loved it. And so then we took and we did it on a larger head at a later date. So this was in the early years of just trying all kinds of stuff. And, of course, out of that came a lot of the things that eventually ended up in the mansion, which was beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, I did probably tell him the story about the gag of the, we got a call one day. We had this big room, and it was all blocked off, and it was black. And in there we gotten a lot of masks that we bought from the shop downtown, the magic shop in Hollywood, just masks that we were going to use in some of our illusions. And we also built a huge monster, and Walt came in with it, and we had it with a rat trap that took off if you used an infrared gun, and it would blow its head off, and then the whole thing would blow up and fall down. And we were just doing crazy stuff like that. And so Walt came in there, and he took the gun, he shot the guy, and he blew up and everything. And so we found out later that we got a call from personnel. They said, the janitors do not want to come into your office unless you leave the lights on. They didn't want to come in there and see all those skulls and all those funny heads and stuff. So we said, okay. So Yale rigged the room. He had an infrared beam in the middle of the room, and he turned the lights real low, the way it was set up. And my wife had made a silk ghost that would have a squirrel cage fan underneath it, and when you turned it on, the ghost would blow up and shimmer and shake. And of course, we had the monster, and then we had all these heads and stuff. Well, we set the room up to where the light was low, but when they came in, when the janitors came in, it was the trigger hit that, and that would turn that light off and turn all the black lights on. The ghost would come to life, and the big guy would blow up, and his head would go all over the room, on a string. So we went home and came back the next morning, and sure enough, the head was hanging in the middle of the room, and the ghost was still up there shimmering and shaking. And we got a call a little later that morning, and they said the janitors are never coming back. You're going to have to clean up your own room. Now, this all gets back to growing up in animation and always playing gags on stuff.
Wow. Yeah, that's such a great story. And so I know that we were saying some of that stuff made it in to the Haunted Mansion, but then you also had a lot of other kind of weird stuff that didn't make it in. Can you tell me about that? I think Walt Disney had the idea to...
Well, I always felt that the mansion should be scary.
Right.
And even Walt said people love to be scared. So I always worked on stuff that was kind of weird and that was different. And because I just felt that we should... And I saw a film, Beauty and the Beast, that was a French-made film. And in it had all these human arms that held torches in the hallway. And then there was human heads that let green steam come out of them. And I thought, this is the kind of stuff that should be in the Haunted Mansion. So I started drawing up all kinds of crazy stuff. I did a candle man, a man that was standing there with his hands up in the air and his fingers were all the ends of candles and stuff. Right. And so I started developing these crazy characters. And we were going to give an exhibit to Ideas to Walt one day, a group of us, all of us, and I had all my stuff. It was kind of weird, but my management was a little concerned about Walt seeing the weird stuff, so they had me over in the corner with all my stuff. And then everybody else had their their presentation right up front. So we got finished, and Walt said, "Is that it for today?" And Dick Irvine says, "Yes, that's it." He said, "Well, what's this stuff over in the corner?" And they said, "Well, that's something that Rolly's been working on." He said, "What is it that Rolly's been working on?" They said, "We don't know. You ask him." So he asked me, and he and I both sat in our chairs, and we rolled over, and I told him at that time exactly what I told you about the fact the film I saw, and I felt that we should have weird stuff in there. And so Walt just said, "Yeah, but this stuff is really weird." I said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "I just want to do something different." And he said, "Well, how are you going to use it?" And I said, "I don't know." And so we got into this I don't know back and forth, and finally he said, "That's it. I'm out of here." So he got up and left, and everybody came over to me that was in the room and said, "We knew that Walt wouldn't like it. We knew that it was too weird." And I said, "I don't know. I know, but I was having fun with it." So the next morning I came to work, and Walt Disney sitting in my chair at my desk at 7 o'clock in the morning. And the first thing he said to me was, "You son of a..." And I said, "Oh, my God, what have I done now?" And he says, "I didn't get an ounce of sleep last night because of all that weird stuff you showed me yesterday." And I said, "Well, those are the ideas that I have, you know." And so he says, he said, "Because I didn't get any sleep," he said, "I thought about it all night." He says, "I think what we should do is have a museum of the weird." And he says, "Rolly, then you can design all the weird stuff you want, and we'll tell the public and our guests that we've gone around the world to find weird things to bring to Disneyland." And I said, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea." So he had the rest of the guys come in, and he gave them a presentation on the Museum of the Weird, using my sketches as the bottom line on it. And when he got finished, he said, "Well, I'm going to go home and go to bed now because I didn't sleep last night." So he left, and after he left, they said, "Rolly, we all knew you had something there."
All right, well, but a lot of the Museum of the Weird stuff, even though they eventually did it, it never got built as a physical building, it did make its way into a comic book recently, right? A few years ago.
The comic book.
Yeah.
And then I saw on your website, one of your sites, that a lot of the drawings and sketches you did made its way into the Haunted Mansion, the new queue over at Magic Kingdom as well. So at least some of that still lives on, which is really neat to see. So another iconic project that you worked on in Disneyland was the Enchanted Tiki Room, which is amazing. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I've always felt that the Tiki Room should be. Well, they always said that if they ever took it out of Disneyland, they'd go to the Smithsonian Institute because it was the first animatronic show that was ever designed and built. And actually, I think it's probably the one thing in my heart that I love the most was because none of us had ever done anything like that before. And Walt would say, "Do this, do that," and we just did it. And when we got finished, it turned out to be a gorgeous, gorgeous show. And the interesting thing about it, I've been talking with Marie about this quite a bit, is that when we were given assignments when we first met and had our workshop about the Tiki Room. It was going to be a little restaurant with tikis as sort of the interior design. But then as the meetings went on, then all of a show started to develop out of it. And Walt would give each one of us an individual challenge, a project to do. And one of them that he gave me was to design the pre-show tikis. He says, because people, he says, I like to entertain people when they're having to stand in line. So he says, I want you to design a little pre-show tiki outside and for the people waiting to get into the restaurant. So I did. And unbeknownst to me, then he gave the assignments for the music to be written, for the birds to sing and what they would sing. The absolute, it was his idea to have the birdmobile come out of the ceiling. Right. So he really was heavily involved with the Tiki Room, and we all put it together, and we built it on we put it in a sound stage to build the whole section of it so that we could practice it and look at it and study it. And well, so we were doing that. Of course, it was still a restaurant. And one day we ran the show, and Walt got finished. He said, this is too good for a restaurant. He says, we're not going to put it in a restaurant. We're going to make a show out of it. So the whole thing was then designed to be an attraction at Disneyland. And Walt put it off for a year because he wasn't completely happy. It was all ready to go, ready to be popped in there, but he wasn't really happy with all the music yet. So he says, "We'll put it in Disneyland a year from now." So he was a perfectionist, and if it didn't please him or it wasn't right, he wouldn't put it in Disneyland. And that was a good example of him. What a beautiful man he was.
Yeah, and I've also in your book you mentioned that you were someone that he respected because you wouldn't just tell him what he wanted to hear, right? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that and about how your dynamic was with Walt?
Yeah, the first thing I learned was that when I first started working at WED, I was in meetings with a year or two, maybe three, and I never said a word. I just studied all the other designers that had worked with Walt clear back into, Snow White, to understand what it was like to work with Walt and how they reacted to him and how he reacted to them. And during that time frame, I realized that a lot of the guys, Walt would say something and they would just come up with all kinds of stuff just so that it sounded like they knew what he was talking about. And I realized a lot of the stuff they were saying was a little bit bogus. And I thought, I'm not going to be that way. I'll be very honest with him about things. And because I don't want to be one of those guys that just has to have something to say to him. So I always sat next to him. I always made it a point to do that. And then sometimes when we get finished with a work session, he'd stand up and I'd grab his coattail and I'd kind of tug on it a little bit. He says, "Yes, Rolly." I said, I'd like to run a few of the things by me that you talked about today because I want to make sure I really understand the direction that you want us to kind of take. And he was really sweet about it. He was very quiet. He sat down and said, "Now, Rolly, this is what I have in mind." And we would talk, and he'd explain the whole thing to me because there were so many people talking all at once. It was kind of hard for me to really analyze what he said. And so he was really cute about it. It was very sweet. And then sometimes I'd pull his coattail and I'd say, "Can you run that by me one more time?" And he said, "I don't know." So anyway, he was very honest with me and I was honest with him.
That's great. All right. Well, then, can you talk a little bit about what your experience was working on the World's Fair at 64, 65 and the Tower of the Four Winds too?
Yeah, well, Walt came in one day and said, there's still one piece of real estate left at the World's Fair. And he said, "I think we should get that." And he said, "I think it should be a little boat ride." And we all kind of looked at each other like, what's he talking about, a little boat ride? We were thinking of something like Storybook Land at Disneyland. We thought, my God, we're doing all this high-tech stuff like Lincoln standing up and talking, and he wants to do a little boat ride. And we thought, well, he's crazy, but we'll do whatever he says. Well, what happened was they asked Mark Davis to do a rendering of what the inside of the small world would look like with children dancing and everything. And so he did a beautiful rendering of what it might look like inside a tent with little children running around and everything. And the next time we had a meeting with Walt, they showed him that sketch, and Walt took one look at it and says, "What's Mary Blair doing?" Now, what it was I think that what he saw that Mark had drawn was okay, but Mary Blair was so childlike and her stylization was so perfect for the idea of the show. So that was it. She was made the original concept designer for the whole show, and then the rest of the kids that worked at WED, including myself, copied her work and helped put the whole show together. Meanwhile, Walt said, "Roland," he said, "I want you to build me a tower of propellers." Says, "I want you to design the Tower of the Four Winds for me." So I did. I actually built a half-inch scale model, and every one of the propellers in that model spun, and so we had a great time with it, and so that's how the Tower of the Four Winds came about. Now this gets back to honesty. What happened was we built the Tower of the Four Winds in Los Angeles off of the model that I did, but the engineers made it so heavy and so cumbersome, I really hated it. I really did. I just thought, oh my God, they've lost the light airiness of the tower that I wanted to create. So, but they went ahead and built it, and and I looked at it, and I was quite, like I said, I was upset about it. Well, I had to drive Walt down to see the original big tower down there at the engineering company. So we got down there, and Walt looked at it, and he looked at me. He said, "What do you think, Rolly?" And I said, "Well, I think it's a piece of crap." And I don't think anybody has ever told Walt that they thought what they designed was a piece of crap.
Sure.
But I was just being honest with him, and he knew that I was being honest. He said, "Now, Roland," he said, "it can't be a piece of crap. It cost me $200,000." So I said, "Okay, fine." So, and he got shipped off to the World's Fair. And as the time went on, I finally did decide to like it. But Walt was so sweet. He said, Roland," he says, "you've got to understand that the engineers have to make sure that this isn't going to blow over." So he says, "You have to bow to the engineers in this particular case." And I said, "Yes." And I said, "Maybe someday we'll build another one and we'll put it in a building and run it off of air conditioning rather than having it outside and have to worry about the elements." So that's my story about the tower.
Wow. So then you were actually in charge of bringing It's a Small World back to Disneyland. Can you just talk a little bit about what that was like and your, I believe that I read that you definitely did. Did you design the clock for the front of Small World as well?
Yeah. Yeah, well, here we go again. This is where Walt steps in and comes up with an idea that makes everything wonderful. We're bringing Small World back to Disneyland, and the space out in front of where the building was going to be was over 300 feet long. So what I did was I got the head model builder, and he and I sat down with all the sketches that Mary had done, and we traced her sketches. And we actually built the whole facade out of cardboard, out of just black and white ink on white cardboard. And we built a half-inch scale model of the entire facade to show Walt. And before Walt came over, we had a tray with a bunch of trees on it that we were going to put around in front of Small World, and we had it up on the box behind the facade of Small World. So we kept reaching up to take a tree down and put it where we thought we'd put it, and just because it was quite a ways to reach, and so that's why we had it up there. And Walt came early, and here was this bunch of trees up on top of this box that represented the building. And Walt looked at it, and he says, "What I really like what you guys did," he says, "you put trees on the roof of the building so nobody will know there's a building there." and it was Fred and I just started busting out laughing. He said, "Yeah, we thought it was a pretty good idea too." And then we started laughing, and he was looking at us like, "Why are you laughing?" And then we told him the true story of why we did it. He says, "I don't care. It's a good idea anyway." And so that's why the trees are on top of the Small World building at Disneyland. Oh, yeah, by the way, there was a platform out front. And Walt said, "Rolly, what are you going to put on there?" And I said, "I don't know. Maybe we'll have have a bandstand out there." He said, "We're not going to have a bandstand out there." He says, "You know what? Why don't you put a clock out there?" So I said, "Okay." So I designed a clock and built a model of the clock, and the model that I built actually worked. And I had the music with it. So I had a complete show with a model, a half-inch scale model of wood, of this clock, and the doors opened up, and the little characters came out, and everything, and I was thrilled with it. I was absolutely thrilled with it, and we showed it to Walt. There's actually a photo around of Walt and I looking at it and laughing, and basically said, "That's great. That's it. I love it. Let's build it." So that's where the clock came from. But again, Walt would come up with just a simple little statement like, "Why don't you put a clock out there?" And that gave you the key to what to do. And then when we got finished with it, it turned out to be gorgeous.
Yeah, it seems like he kind of knew how to point people in the right direction without, to get exactly what he wanted. Like he didn't settle for anything that wasn't, his vision almost. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. Well, again, he was a good casting director. He knew exactly what projects to hand to different designers. And I do know for some reason he and I got in sync on the ideas, and he knew what he wanted me to do, and I knew that he knew what I could do, and so that worked out perfect. We had a marvelous working relationship. In fact, I remember showing him the half-inch scale model of the entire facade. and nobody else came out. They just sent Walt out by himself to do the buy-off on the model that I built. And again, it was only black and white cardboard. It wasn't done in wood yet. And Walt took one look at it and he says, "Willie, do you have any excuses today?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't." And he said, "Okay, then build it," and turned around and walked away. So, I mean, but I for some reason, he and I really were very much in sync.
Well, I do want to tell you, too, I promised my 5-year-old that I would tell you this because I told her that I was going to talk to you today. And I picked her up from preschool, and we got in the car, and I started the car, and she asked to put music on, and I just hit my iPod, and the music for It's a Small World came on. And I just thought that was kind of fitting. So she told me to make sure I told you that we listened to the music today.
Oh, that's such a great story. He picked his 5-year-old daughter up from preschool, and she knew that he was going to talk to you today.
Oh, really?
And so he had his iPod, the music.
Yeah.
So she played It's a Small World.
Oh.
And she wanted him to be sure to tell you
that
she listened.
Oh, that's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. Yeah. Well, now she can hear me now, can't she?
She will as soon as she's out with her mom, but as soon as she comes home, I'll let her hear this.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So thank you for
that. I'll give her
name?
What?
Alexa.
What's her name?
Yeah, it's Alexa.
Well, thank you, Alexa, for being interested in my little stories.
Thank you so much. Okay, so just to go back to Walt Disney for one second, and this might be a strange question, but what is the best piece of advice you've ever received from Walt Disney, if you have one, of course?
Oh boy, the best piece of advice is something I learned from Walt. I think the most important thing is there was formulas that he taught us, and I think research. I think whenever you're given a project, no matter what business you're in, you should really research the project so you understand the project completely. And once you understand the project completely, then always have more answers than they have questions about the project. And that's something I'd like to pass on. And I pass it on to my son, and he uses that, and he loves using that. He likes the idea that you have more answers than they have questions, because that's what happens when you're designing something. Everybody's going to question you. And so you've got to really know inside and out and backwards what the project is. And Walt was like that. He knew everything, so he could answer any questions that were asked.
Wow, that's great advice. And I'm going to wrap this up in a minute. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I just wanted to ask you about, I believe it was in 2004, you were giving your own window on Main Street, USA. Can you tell me a little bit about what that was like for you?
Oh, that was exciting because I think I even mentioned in my book that getting the award as a legend was very special, but getting the window was even more special. And the reason for that is, from the time I started working for Disney, the windows were such a gorgeous little tribute. And I can remember being at Disneyland and reading the windows, and I actually got to know everyone that was on those windows clear back in the 50s and the 60s. And I thought, what a gorgeous way to thank the people that worked for Walt, to be able to have that as a thank you in the windows. And so when I got the window, it was absolutely, it was about as thrilling as you could get. It was just great. And Bob Gurr was a sweetheart. He actually did a video on me during that whole presentation, which I have and I love dearly. So it was sweet of Bob to do that.
Wow. And rightly, very much deserved too. Your work is amazing, and thank you so much for, spending the time with me and with everyone who's going to get a chance to listen to this. I really, really appreciate that.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. I love telling the stories. It was such an incredible time frame, and Marie worked at Disney as well, and she and I talk about this all the time, about how special it was and what we came away with that, and what a special time frame it was with Walt. And it's incredible. So to be able to pass these on and let people know what Walt was really like as a person was very special to me. So I love doing that. So thank you for asking me to do it.
Thank you, Rolly. And if anyone wants to check out more from Rolly Crump, please head over to rollingcrump.com to see Rolly's work on and what he's been up to. And then you could stop by. It's kind of a cute story.com. And there's links there to buy Rolly's autobiography and some of the follow-up audio books that he's done. So please, I'm just encouraging everyone to, get on over there and get those books. You'll really enjoy them. And thank you, Rolly, once again. And I really appreciate it. I can't wait to show and let my children listen to this afternoon. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
And that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Ear to There Disney Podcast. Thank you so much again to my guest from episode number 11, the one, the only, Rolly Crump. I was so excited to bring you this episode again. It's one of my favorite interviews I've ever done with one of my favorite guests, Rolly Crump. He is awesome. And like I said in the beginning, man, can he tell a story. So thank you again to Rolly, and thank you to his wife, Marie, for putting this together. You heard her in the background a little bit there. And thank you so much for listening. Oh, if you don't know, this music playing right now is the Lanai background music from Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, of course, an attraction that Rolly played a huge part in. But thank you so much again for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you had listened to it way back when it was live on episode 11, I hope you enjoyed it then and enjoyed it. I keep saying enjoyed, but I hope you liked it then, and I hope you really enjoyed it this time as well. So if you did like the episode, please tell somebody about it. I really appreciate a share. Share it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever you share your social media stuff. I would really be appreciated. Just remember, there will be a new episode of the Ear to There Disney Podcast next week, as well as a new episode of the Walt Disney World Word of the Week. So until next time, thank you again so much for listening. Have a phenomenal week. Bye-bye.
Amigos down there, it is me up here. Amigos, Romans, and Disneylanders. Stop walking while I'm squawking. Caramba, we have something really big for you today. It is the world premiere of Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room. It is Disney entertainment at its most exciting, best kind. You wait for the show right here below me in the Magic Garden where the gods and goddesses perform. Get your tickets right over here for Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room. This has been a recording.
Ear to there, ear to there.